Hey, it's Fox from InfernoFox Gaming. To say 2024 has been an eventful year would be to devolve into one too many a platitude. While there weren't as many bangers that came out as what we saw in 2023, there was still a solid number of fun titles. And again, even if there weren't as many of these bangers, it's still a great opportunity to knock out some titles in our backlogs, right? And that's what 2024 was for me, because as you go through with me, my list of top 24 in 2024 games, it will not only include releases in this year, but also some of the items that I have kicked off of my backlog. And while you're here checking this out, make sure to like the video, click subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. Let's start off with an honorable mention, and that would be Balatro. As of the recording of this video, I've put in a dozen or so hours of gameplay for this little poker and solitaire hybrid. The simple graphics and music won't win any awards, but playing a game like this is kind of like playing a Nintendo game for their graphics. It's all about the gameplay, and Balatro's is fantastic and highly addictive. This is definitely worth a snag if you want to play it on the go, either on your Switch, smartphone, or whatever preferred mobile device. So let's go ahead and kick off the top 24 in 2024, and that's going to be with number 24, Xenoblade Chronicles 2. This one sat in my midlog for like 4 years or so. I'm so glad that I finally finished this entry as well as the Torna Country DLC. The story on this was quite decent and the music's amazing, but that's it. The voice actors selected for each character don't match well to how they look, nor does the English script to their behaviors. And there's a number of cringe moments with the dialogue as well. Another annoying part, the field skill checks, requiring level up on skills like lockpicking and strength, were ridiculous. And it really pauses a number of moments in the main storyline as well. You have to stop to level these up to even progress. And don't get me started on the awful, convoluted battle system. It's a miracle this has even appeared on my top list for 2024, which honestly is probably due to the uplift from the Torna Country DLC. That improved the overall gameplay and battle system much in the same way on how Final Fantasy 13-2 did compared to what was in the original Final Fantasy 13. Moving on, number 23 is Portal 2. What happens when you add a couple B-list celebrities as voice actors to the first Portal game and double the length, but not necessarily the overall quality? You get Portal 2. That doubling of the length grew tiresome when I kept seeing the same drab-looking environments to this entry as well. The overall aspect of the Portal gameplay somehow felt more restrictive to these environments as well, as it seemed like the multiple ways to solve some of the puzzles that were present in the first entry weren't so with this one. Thankfully, though, again, overall gameplay really hasn't. You throw a portal, you throw another one, you go through one, you come out the other end. And it was this gameplay that made the first entry quite fun and made this one quite doable as well. I am still thankful to have played both of these Portal entries for the first time this year. Number 22, Nintendo World Championship NES Edition. I felt like this game abandoned the spirit of what the original NES World Championship game was about. That involved getting 50 coins in the first Super Mario Bros. Game as quickly as possible, complete a race in Rad Racer, and then use the remaining time left to get as high a score as possible in Tetris. This new iteration on the Nintendo Switch, however, focuses only on speedrunning and mostly the platforming titles on the NES. And this speedrunning aspect is fun, especially for an NES veteran like myself, but the overall skill is only limited to the speed aspect. I had heard stories of how fun the 8-player challenges were, but this was another aspect of the game that evidently wasn't as fun IRL. When I played it with my friends, and we had 8 of us going at once, each of us had varying skill levels from I've played these games recently to I played them 20 years ago to even I've never played these before, which led to a lot of frustration from friends leaning on the latter examples. I will admit it was funny hearing some of my friends say Super Mario Bros. 1 was harder than Dark Souls. They grew annoyed with the rewind feature especially, as it led them to getting hit through with doom loops of constantly being thrown into the enemy or overrun that caused their rewind to be necessary. Number 21, Trails of Cold Steel 3. This is the first Trails game that will appear on this list, and it will not be the last. In fact, I played through 7 of the first 9 games in the series this year alone, and all of them will be appearing on this list. Cold Steel 3, though, gets the short shrift of the lowest score that appear on the list due to the bad luck of it with me playing it on the Nintendo Switch, because not only did I have a number of slowdown issues, but over a half dozen times it crashed on me. And for some reason, this entry had lacked an autosave feature, which taught me real quick to save and save often, manually saving to do so. Still, besides all of that, we got a good RPG with great character development and a fantastic soundtrack to boot. I was really digging some of the Trails series mainstay appearances too. Funny thing is that I started this game after completing the first 2 Cold Steel entries back in mid-2022, but Emily at Orbalology convinced me to hold off playing Cold Steel 3 until I had completed the previous entries that released before Cold Steel's 1 and 2. And I am so glad that she convinced me of that, because appearances of characters like Randy, Agate, and Tita definitely hit a lot harder when I saw them in Cold Steel 3. Though the double-edged sword of that, of course, is that ending, man, the ending to Cold Steel 3 hit that much harder too. Number 20, Super Mario Advance 4 Super Mario Bros. 3. Oh, Nintendo, you just love to put voices in your Mario games on the GBA, don't you? That alone is why I find these Advance series games so intolerable. The voices themselves, okay, they're just fine. But when you're hearing them over and over and over again with no option to turn them off or volume down is just awful.
Just what I needed.
No, Mario, you saying that for the 1,000th time is not what I needed. It was these voices from the previous entries that I had owned and played years and years ago, plus the e-reader aspect, were why I had never bought Super Mario Advance 4 on the Game Boy Advance. I finally got to playing through the NSO version this year. Yes, it still has the awful voices there, but it was an absolute treat for Nintendo to throw in all of the extra e-reader levels at no additional cost, beyond, of course, the normal NSO expansion pack subscription. This is classic Mario platforming at its finest, since it's the Mario All-Stars version of Mario 3. I'm still hoping, though, Nintendo will remaster Mario All-Stars and just make all the SNES versions of these games widescreen, akin to what Sega did in Sonic Origins. Maybe they could also throw in a voice volume control too, please, Nintendo? Number 19, Trails in the Sky the Third. This is another one of the weaker titles in the Trails series, though that's mostly because this just kind of felt like an appendix to the fantastic first 2 games of this trilogy. Seriously, a number of the environments are just reused in a similar way that was seen in like Final Fantasy IV The After Years, when the party was on the True Moon, for example. The big difference between this Trails game and Final Fantasy IV After Years is that the third chapter is a genuinely good time, while also serving as a bridge to a number of plots to future entries in the Trails series. The amount of escalation in overall stats were insane to see, too. I had a number of party members at level 200 with hit points in the tens of thousands. So crazy, but a lot of fun, too. Number 18, Castlevania Portrait of Ruin. As I'd mentioned previously, I'd been playing Trails games throughout the year, so playing games like this during that time was a nice break. Though it made me notice just how weak the writing in Portrait of Ruin was, or how bland the anime aesthetic was, especially compared to the Trails series. But if weak writing and silly character portraits are its only issues, then what was left was an absolutely fun and fantastic Metroidvania. Not only do we plod along Castlevania itself, but Jonathan and Charlotte are transported to other parts of the world a la portraits akin to something like Mario 64. This world tour aspect reminded me heavily of the Genesis classic Castlevania Bloodlines, which makes sense since Portrait of Ruin is like a spiritual sequel to that game. Heck, it features the children of the heroes of Bloodlines. I also enjoyed the switching aspect between Jonathan and Charlotte too. Number 17, Star Ocean, the Second Story R. I started off my first experience in the Star Ocean franchise with a bang here, as this was so much fun. The battle system merges on the on-screen approach of enemies to an action RPG style, and with the overall fighting itself feeling both fair and challenging. The number of customization options as well were a ton of fun, and I loved maxing out Claude and the rest of his party. A number of these party members really didn't get near as much development story-wise as I would have liked, though Claude and Rean did get a good amount of spotlight, with some interesting twists and turns. The music was decent, though my odd complaint is that it almost feels too orchestrated. No, does that make sense? It's like it felt a bit overwrought and overdone, and it just didn't have a good balance like what I experienced with other remasters and remixes, particularly like the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters. Beyond all of that, the game is absolutely beautiful. I have no idea how Tri-Ace and Square Enix managed to merge 3D world environments with 2D pixelated characters, but it just works. Number 16, Haunted Castle Revisited. Thank you, M2, for not only porting all three of the Nintendo DS Metroidvania-style Castlevania games via the Dominus Collection, but also giving us this absolutely fantastic remake. The OG, simply called Haunted Castle, is an absolutely brutal, unfun slog meant to be a quarter-munching arcade version of the retro Castlevania. M2 thankfully took away everything that made this OG so terrible. They made our titular hero, Simon Belmont, control just like any normal Castlevania game, remixed the killer tunes, and gave the game a great graphical overhaul as well. Those 3DS games are absolutely worth a playthrough, but as big a Retrovania and Metroidvania fan as myself, the Dominus Collection is worth a buy simply for Haunted Castle Revisited alone. Number 15, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This is an absolutely beautiful retelling and reimagining of the rest of the first disc from the OG Final Fantasy VII that remake hadn't yet covered. Cloud and company look absolutely fantastic. The voice acting is stellar, and the soundtrack is so strikingly done. One minor knock with it would have to be, perhaps too many mini games, especially a specific one that cannot be skipped, starring the meh Kate Sith. I'm also not a huge fan of the OG getting out of the realm of turn-based battles, but I was able to really get into the battle system a lot more smoothly than when I originally played Final Fantasy VII Remake. Probably the best aspect of this game, though, would have to be the character development. I absolutely loved seeing the original Nibelheim flashback in full 4K glory, along with hints throughout it to the real truth. I also loved seeing my favorite Crisis Core character make a surprise comeback. But most of all, I loved how absolutely touching it was to see a character like Barrett get some real love and attention in this version. The OG never had shown his wife Myrna. Barrett mentioned him, but that was really it. With Rebirth in a flashback of sorts, we got to see her briefly, as well as see the real show of love that was really evident between the two of them. It was a moment that was really touching to see. But if I loved this game, why is it not in the top 10? It probably would have. It would have, even with playing through so many of the Trails series, if it wasn't for the ending. I'm going to avoid spoilers here, but even to this day, I'm still pissed at it. Final Fantasy VII Remake teased at the possibility at things being different this time around, and Rebirth even confirmed that it was until it wasn't. Final Fantasy as a series generally does a good job handling timey-wimey hijinks, but I'm not convinced it sticks the landing throwing in multiverse bojazz here. The end result shows a pretty solid conclusion that spits in the face of the possibilities that showed at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake. And that final phase of the last boss can go fuck itself. Seriously, making that last part a 10-second DPS check while causing our character's health to precipitously drop was just evil. But given who the last boss was, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. Good game design is tough but fair, and this was neither. Number 14, Castlevania Order of Ecclesia. I forget where I saw it, but I heard someone describe this as a proto version of Bloodstained, Ritual of the Night, and I absolutely agree, since Ecclesia's Shanoa and Ritual's Miriam are quite similar. Both characters are after a brother-type character who may be on the wrong side of morality, both can absorb monster powers, and of course, both look like they could sing lead vocals for any number of kick-ass metal bands. It's lucky for me that I absolutely loved my time with Ritual of the Night because I also enjoyed exploring the many different locations in Order of Ecclesia. While we don't see the wide swath of different environments like Portrait of Ruin, there's still over 15 different areas on the map that can be selected to explore as Shanoa pursues her brother Albus. These environments are well done, accompanied with what I believe is the strongest soundtrack of the DS series of Castlevania titles. I also really enjoyed the variety of different powers that Shanoa gets, such as the Magnus power, allowing her to use magnet beacons for forward progression. Speaking of other DS series titles, I think this was probably the most difficult of these 3 DS games. And not just the bosses, which I admittedly had a tough time with, but even fighting the normal riffraff enemies. I nearly died a few times simply exploring the various environments on my way to finding a save room. Number 13, Trails in the Sky, First Chapter. While I began my Trails journey with the first 2 Cold Steel games back in 2022, this entry marks the very first game in the overall Trails series. Yes, I know this pretty much ignores the fact that this is really an offshoot of the Legend of Heroes series, but for all intents and purposes, Trails began here in the Sky's first chapter. The overall game sees siblings Estelle and Joshua Bright explore the country of Liberl, working to become senior bracers by helping the various cities as they travel along the way. It ended up being such a fun and chill adventure, one only that sees the stakes increase near the last few hours or so, especially with that stinger ending. While I had experience with Cold Steel's battle system, it was great getting back to the roots with this entry. The Trails, and really this game in particular's battle system, essentially takes the best elements of a variety of Final Fantasy games. It takes the turn-based order system from Final Fantasy X, the materia system from Final Fantasy VII, especially with its customizability, and overhead grid placement of enemies and allies from Tactics. Though, for this last one, Trails is much more quick and streamlined. With this being a Nihon Falcom title, the music is a blast too, reflecting the chill nature of the game. A favorite moment of mine in the game is the play that Estelle and their friend Chloe help the latter's school put on, where the girls play the heroes and rescue Joshua, who, in a reverse of gender roles, plays the princess. This game, with that and just a lot of other ways, it felt really ahead of its time. Not only with that kind of a theming, but having such a strong female protagonist without herself falling into a myriad of female-led character tropes. Because of this, Estelle quickly became one of my favorite video game heroines, and I'm so glad her presence is included in some way, shape, or form in so many of the following titles. Number 12. The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom. Speaking of female protagonists, our heroine Zelda's first turn as a playable hero in the series is an absolute banger. And yes, we're just going to ignore the CDI title, The Wand of Gamelon. But I love how the game starts and we get to control an absolutely unstoppable tank that is Link, rescuing Princess Zelda from Ganon once again. But even once this is complete, the tables turn and we see Link absorbed in a rift, but not without saving Zelda before doing so. Zelda's then joined by Tri, who gives her the Tri-Rod, which is then used to create echoes of both living and inanimate objects. I had a blast using this echo system to not only solve puzzles throughout my journey, but also explore Hyrule's many nook and crannies. I often feel like I was getting into areas I shouldn't have. The Other side, though, of this, what's actually a double-edged sword, was the fact that this echoes system could get a bit cumbersome once I had dozens upon dozens of said echoes. I also have to speak of the many frame rate drops that I ran into during gameplay. I really noticed this to the point of it being painful during longer gameplay sessions. I also don't understand why they refer to the Triforce as Prime Energy drink or whatever. Even with these quibbles, there was so much to love about this game, and I love that this game is set in the same world as the SNES classic Link to the Past, albeit of course later in the future. And dungeons are back too. Being able to clear out most of these 8 in a non-linear order was a great touch. Number 11, Kirby Planet Robobot. The only negative with this entry is probably the fact that as of the recording of this video, this entry is stuck on the Nintendo 3DS. With just how stellar this entry is in the Kirby series, I wouldn't be surprised if we got a port as a last hurrah for the Switch. Kirby's games tend to release as such on like Nintendo consoles. But regarding this entry, I was initially hesitant, especially because I just thought Kirby was getting a mech suit, and I really don't like mech suits. At least that's what I used to think before I'd opened my ways of thinking. I even talked about such games with mechs on a previous video before. The story itself is standard Kirby fare. Our pink puffball hero must stop an extraterrestrial capitalistic regime from colonizing his planet. To my surprise and delight, the mech suit advertised in both the box art and the many trailers don't totally take up all the gameplay. There's a wide variety of different levels, even with the mechanical elements in play through the overall theming. While Kirby has his copying abilities in his standard form, his mech suit form also gets these abilities too, and there's a surprisingly large amount of them, with the Smash Brothers ability being my favorite. The bosses are great, including the last boss gambit, and I enjoyed this game that I ended up 100%ing it. I'd probably put this as the third best Kirby game that I've played overall, with Kirby and the Forgotten Land besting it, and of course, Kirby Superstar at the number 1 slot. Number 10, Flowstone Saga. I did review this for Impact Gameworks earlier this year and quite enjoyed my time with this title. With the setting in a tropical island, but with its 16-bit sprites, it had like a Chrono Cross and Chrono Trigger feel to it. But there are no timey-wimey or multiverse shenanigans here, nor any large villain that needs to be stopped from destroying the world. In that way, it lends the game a more cozier, down-to-earth feel. The writing is funny and a bit satirical, also giving it that fun and cozy feeling. There's also a village development aspect, though this tends to decrease a bit as the game goes on. The biggest draw to the game is the Tetris-like battle system. The game does a good job of explaining it through tutorials, though if the player cruises through them too fast, they're not available again to view in the menus. I was a bit overwhelmed with the battle system at first, just due to having to balance working on the main puzzle matrix, keeping an eye on our protagonist Mirai's health and stats, watching when the enemies were preparing to attack so I could try to stop them, and picking the best moment to deploy my own mana attack or recovery flask. But once I did get it all, man, did it really click for me. I will absolutely be playing this once again when it releases for the Nintendo Switch. Number 9, Mega Man 5 for the Game Boy. I had always started and stopped this title over half dozen times for one reason or another, but it was this year that I finally completed it. That's probably best attributed to this title falling on the Nintendo Switch's NSO service. Admittedly, I do wish this would have appeared on another Mega Man collection from Capcom, but at least, hey, now we finally got it. This title is quite unique too. The previous 4 entries are amalgamations of their NES contemporaries, although with a slight twist. For example, Mega Man 2 for the Game Boy has 4 Robot Masters from the NES version of Mega Man 2 and 4 from Mega Man 3. The Mega Man 5 on the Game Boy, however, is wholly its own unique adventure. drawing new robot masters based on the planets in the solar system. The game ends up running quite similar to the previous Game Boy Mega Man games. The sprites for Mega Man and enemies are huge, resulting in a bit of screen crunch for the rest of the environments and a general slower feeling, at least compared to the NES entries, but this is by far the best of the Game Boy series, even surpassing my favorite of them, the third entry. The music here is classic Mega Man in its 8-bit glory. Number 8. Portal 1.
It's ingenious in its simplicity.
This statement fits the gameplay loop for this game so very well. Throwing a pair of portals to not only progress forward, but also combat enemies at times is a ton of fun. I also love endlessly creating portals in narrow hallways to generate my own treadmill-like running environments and throwing them on the floor and ceiling, then just falling forever. All of the puzzle solving takes place in the same kind of environments, so there's not too much variety within the game itself. I also didn't really get into the whole cake is a lie thing or the love of the companion cube, but it's probably because I'm nearly 20 years late to this game's party. Still, what was a welcome surprise was getting this on the Nintendo Switch. But were we gypped? Yeah, we did get Portal 2 on this overall Portal Companion Collection, but maybe we should have gotten the orange box instead. I mean, if we got that, we would have gotten all the Half-Life content too, right? Number 7.5. Trails to Cold Steel 4. Whoa, wait a second. Am I cheating? Am I going out of my mind? Did I somehow and stupidly forget to input this absolutely stellar game into the mix and have to somehow poorly add this to my top 24 here? Well, it's a combination of all that and more, but I just couldn't forget about this absolutely fantastic game. All the issues that I had with Cold Steel 3 were remedied, though I did notice load times on the Switch being significantly longer than with Cold Steel 3. Not only is this game a culmination of 4 Cold Steel entries, it also brings in the entire casts of the Sky trilogy and Zero duology in one place, in an Avengers-style team-up against the biggest threat anyone in Zemuria has seen yet. The cliffhanger ending of 3 sees that action continue as we get to control the greatest heroes in Zemuria right off the bat in the prologue. The story admittedly does slow down a bit from there as Rean's students do work to reunite with their instructor. I was at about hour 25 once that reunion actually took place, so I was thinking maybe I was at the halfway marker. Surprisingly, this was really the completion of the first third of the game, and that's exactly how long it took. It was 73 hours for me to fully beat and complete it, with me taking advantage of the godsend that is the fast-forward feature throughout the battles and a bit of the traversal. I absolutely loved seeing Rean's story conclude, though this entry does go really heavy on the tropey, all the women love the main protagonist bit. But honestly, the Trails series actually makes this believable with Rean, Lloyd, and Estelle. All 3 of these lead protagonists are not only competent leaders in their own rights, but they're also very emotionally intelligent. They can understand their own emotions as they are feeling them, while also responding to their own friends' emotions and even enemy emotions in a way that really helps to strengthen overall relationships. It's why, after nearly 200 hours, I'm still not sick of Rean Schwarzer, and now, after over 450 hours, I'm still ready for more Trails games. Number 7. Ys 10 Nordics. Nihon Falcom continues their tradition of party-based entries in the Ys series, though they ended up simplifying things a ton here. Instead of the bog standard 6 total characters with 3 playable at one time, often having a sort of rock, paper, scissors type weapon system, they threw all of that out and only had 2 people in the party at all times. We've got our hero, Adol Kristen, and a new character introduced, Karja Balta. They embody the familiar themes of fire and ice, sword and axe, each with a myriad of skills that use these types of powers. Being an action JRPG, the battles against monsters and Grieger, they're a type of not quite undead enemy, are fast, fun, and furious. I was also surprised to see myself enjoy all the ship combat, too, that was in it. Now, I'm not big into nautical theming, and I'm sure games like Assassin's Creed Black Flag did it better, but this naval combat was a ton of fun. And being a game from Nihon Falcom, the pedigree on the music is absolutely stellar. One thing I appreciated with this title, particularly in the soundtrack, was the quality not only of the high-energy tunes that we get with the E-Series, but even with the more morose themes. Now, I played this in a very dark time of the year for me personally, so these musical themes really hit close to home. Fortunately, so did many of the themes the actual theming within the story itself had, such as remembering not to give up on the important fights and to be there for those whom are most important. Now, I've heard other fellow YouTube content creators refer to the story and characters as being Trailsified, meaning that Nihon Falcom's other JRPG series, Trails, has influenced the larger amount of story and increased spotlight on other characters. Now, I would agree to this, but where some of these individuals may make it seem like a negative aspect, I loved it. Not only did it provide a couple very important nuggets on Adol and his hetero life mate Dogi's pasts and futures, thanks to that secret ending, but it was just cool to get the background on Karja and the many people in her family. The game ends up feeling like a family affair with an overall story that lacks the big world-ending scenario that I felt like was present with a number of Ys series games in the past. And that, like I mentioned with Flowstone Saga, was honestly a nice change of pace. And this quickly became, just like Kirby Planet Robobot, my third favorite in the Ys series. Like Ys 8 Lacrimosa of Dana, I took the time, I 100%ed this bad boy and got the Platinum Trophy, which actually is only my 8th one. Number 6, Trails from Zero. This game felt like the best of both worlds from the Trail in the Sky and Cold Steel series. We got the chibi-style graphics from the Sky trilogy, but also a lot of quality of life things from Cold Steel. This, of course, is because the Zero duology takes place canonically and was released between Sky and Cold Steel. A number of events that I saw unfold during Cold Steel 1 and 2 when I played them also occurred during the Zero duology as well. So it was kind of cool for me to see them firsthand here, like really live them. This duology of Trails from Zero and its second game features Detective Lloyd Bannings, fresh out of the police academy, looking to follow his late brother Guy's footsteps by joining the Crossbell Police Department. He gets assigned to a newly formed group within the department called the Special Support Section, kind of like the government's own offshoot of the Bracer system. He's joined by 3 other individuals, each with their own history that resulted in them all, including their chief Sergei, getting shunted to what amounts as a government-sponsored group of bracers. I absolutely loved everything about this game. Like, we see the battle system from the Sky trilogy, so I was able to fit right in immediately. I also saw that we got the full party of 4 characters immediately at the start of the game. Not only is the music top-notch, it also has wonderfully developed characters, including surprise additions of Estelle and Joshua from the Sky trilogy. But going back to Lloyd, I really identified with him the most. My father was a police officer for over 35 years, so I absolutely know and understand the value of community policing, which is what is at the heart of the Special Support Section, or SSS for short. Also, having lost my older brother quite recently too, it really made me understand Lloyd's drive to succeed as a detective. The Switch version I played was by far the smoothest experience I had at the time with the Trails series too. I was a bit bummed that this wasn't dubbed in English though honestly it ended up such a small issue and one remedied by turning the Japanese voice volume like way down. Number 5, Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. The OG Paper Mario on the 64 was a comfort food RPG of mine, seeing a number of replays over the years since I originally played it back when it came out in the year 2000. That said, even though I did own a GameCube upon its launch, I never played this sequel title before. The aughts were a decade where I mostly focused on playing a number of multiplayer games like Smash Melee, Halo, Rock Band, and more such multiplayer games instead of single-player experiences. With all that said though, I'm glad I finally got the opportunity to play the Thousand Year Door remake that was released on the Switch this year. With this being a Mario RPG game, the story is rather minimalistic, but infused with a large breadth of character and charm. This includes the simple battle system from Paper Mario, though with a few additions, including a new audience mechanic that actually adds a lot of flavor to the game. I also loved that Mario isn't capped to level 24 like the original. Having fully maxed stats was a blast to get, which I really needed in the final 100 floor challenge, which does go to an awesome super boss battle at the end. There are a few retreads from Paper Mario 64, such as playing as a captured Princess Peach in between chapters, collecting 7 star-related MacGuffins. Also, if we're kind of citing some criticisms, I really didn't appreciate the spin dash mechanic from Paper Mario 64 being taken away either. Until Mario gets his Yoshi friend, traversal with just Mario walking it's too darn slow. Beyond a few of these negatives, I'm sold on this being by far the best Paper Mario title, though not the best overall Mario RPG. That will remain with Super Mario RPG. And maybe the remake of Super Mario RPG if Nintendo would be gracious enough to provide an update and add a hard difficulty mode. Number 4, Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake. What an absolutely amazing remake this turned out to be, and how different it looks now versus the announcement trailer back in 2021. The Switch mobile port version was the first title I played in the Dragon Quest series when I experienced my gaming midlife crisis back in early 2020. Many have said that this was one of the poorest versions to play, but if anything, it harkened me back to the early days to games like Final Fantasy I on the NES. I was awestruck with the feeling of having the wide world open to me, especially when I got the ship for the first time. The battle system felt like I was playing classic turn-based Final Fantasy, but in like an Earthbound sort of way. Kind of odd for me to compare Dragon Quest to Earthbound, right? I did play the first 2 Earthbound games before Dragon Quest III after all. All that said about my past experience with the Switch version of Dragon Quest III, playing this HD 2D version was all of that and just so much more. The graphics were absolutely phenomenal, marrying the 2D sprites with the beautifully detailed 3D environments, much in the same way that Star Ocean 2's remake did. The music, however, is fully orchestrated, yet not overly done like I mentioned with Star Ocean 2. The epic, sweeping adventure or overworld theme continues to impress no matter how many times I hear it, as well as annoy my partner Jamie Owls as I hum and whistle to it. I'm so happy there's minimal changes to the battle system itself, as even I managed to die a couple times on like certain tougher battles, even playing on the normal level of the newly added difficulties settings. I'm not one to go in on the monster collecting stuff, but I can appreciate this newly added aspect along with the new monster wrangler class. I also found the new story beats regarding Hero's father Ortega honestly pretty intriguing. And if anything else, I'm excited for the next set of HD 2D games in the Dragon Quest series. Please Square Enix remake Dragon Quest 4 through 6 the same way. No, better yet, let's finally give Final Fantasy VI the HD 2D treatment. Number 3, Persona 3 Reload. Playing this game during the early winter months of 2024 fit the overall blue mood of this game so very well. I won't spoil anything regarding this, but blue being the base color for this entry absolutely makes sense once I concluded the game and my 80 hours I spent there. I never played any of the previous iterations of Persona 3 before, so I can't speak to the Persona 5ification of this game, but regardless, I had a blast. There's so much style and substance with this game that I can see a number of aspects from 5 in it, even if they hadn't been there before. Being a Persona title, we see our main protagonist in high school by day and fighting Persona Shadows by night with his team of fellow teenagers. What I really appreciated with this title was that within the first hour of the game, I was immediately thrown into the mix of this daily cycle versus Persona 5, where around hour 4 was when that finally hit. I also loved the fact that the base team, called C's, was already up and when the protagonist joined, versus it forming around the main character in Persona 5. Regarding the team members in Persona 3, they seemed a bit more of a diverse cast than what was in 5. I mean, come on, we got to have a Shiba Inu on the team. These characters, their own personal stories, and the whole story itself was amazing. I touched upon this and more in my review of the game I released earlier this year, so if you're interested in hearing me talk about it more, check that review out. Oh, I do have to shout out just how amazing the soundtrack was, being a hip-hop and jazz mix of various tunes. But this kind of highly stylized OST is old hat for the Persona series. Atlus knows how to make bangers. Number 2, Trails to Azure. I do have one big issue with this game, and that would be the SA of one of the main characters by one of the villains, while the rest of the party doing nothing to stop them. This behavior marked a change in the overall Trails series that I noticed. Azure is the 5th title overall, and with this marks a level of sexualization seen on the female characters that then carries on through the Cold Steel games. Yes, perhaps this can just be attributed to boys will be boys. Whoops, wrong, normalizing platitude. Maybe it can just be attributed to JRPG tropes, but what made Zero and the Sky trilogy great was that any of the sexualized attitude was minimal at best. Beyond that, though, beyond this issue, Azure is absolutely fantastic. Lloyd's journey expands as his SSS team does, with a pair of additional members now to boot. The overall character development for the core team of 4 gets expanded with some especially high deep dives for Lloyd. I also love that a number of things carried over from my playthrough of Trails from Zero. This included all of my characters' levels, quests that were completed, as well as whom I had Lloyd develop a bond with. Stuff like this was just added icing on the cake of a fantastic game. Being that the character levels carried over, there was a sort of escalation that continued overall with the strength of the monsters and bosses too. This made jumping back into the battles a continuation of the fun. I also loved seeing my characters get up to level 150 near the end of the game, having hit point totals in the thousands and damaging enemies for tens of thousands too. After experiencing the pain of having to break hit point barriers in games like Final Fantasy X, having this happen here with no effort was just so cool to see. But by far, the absolute best part of this game was the story. Without spoiling anything, I loved the many twists and turns the game had, as well as that ending. Once the last boss was beaten, seeing Lloyd meet up with a character we the players hadn't seen him meet, there just aren't any words. This was one of the few games this year that had me tear up, especially personally with a recent loss that I had. Just, what an amazing game. But surprisingly, it wasn't the best game that I played in 2024. That goes to number 1, Trails in the Sky, 2nd chapter. This game cemented Estelle as Bestel. She is quite possibly one of my favorite JRPG characters now, ever. The start of the game sees her have a very real and visceral reaction to losing someone close to her. She then uses her raw grit and determination to get this person back, spending a good majority of the game in this pursuit. Where the character development in the first chapter was great, the real meat and potatoes is shown here with all of the characters that we met. Some absolutely stellar highlights I felt was like the conversation Estelle and her now best friend Chloe had about Joshua. I've had the fortune of having some wonderful female friends in my life, and this conversation between Estelle and Chloe felt like a real conversation such friends would have with each other. Chloe herself also gets some great developments as she grapples with her struggle becoming the crown princess of Liberl, as well as her more important role as it pertains to the larger last dungeon portion of the game. Other characters in the party got amazing development too, like Agate and Tita. It was really sweet seeing the little 12-year-old Tita show some strength and compassion to care for Agate, and he in turn opening up to her. Tita being the only character he literally shows any weakness for. This, of course, is all before the awkward will they, won't they being forced on the two in Cold Steel's 3 and 4. In those two games, Tita is 16, but Agate is 28, and that's just, ugh. Gameplay-wise, Trails in the Sky second chapter is the same as what we've seen in the first chapter, albeit again with the escalation that I mentioned, which had occurred between Trails from Zero and Azure. The battle system still works just so very well, but again, no surprises here for turn-based RPG fans with Trails overall. A lot of the music is similar from the previous entry, though there are some newer tracks which fit the overall motifs and environments quite well. For me, it just gets back to how phenomenal this story and the characters were, married with stellar gameplay and battle mechanics. I've played JRPGs for over 35 years now, and this by far is one of the greatest of them I have ever played. It is just that good. It has me very excited for the Trails in the Sky first chapter remake, because of course we should then get a remake of the second chapter as well. And there you have it, my top 24 games in 2024. What were your top games that you played this year? What are your thoughts about my list? Make sure to let me know in the comments section below. Love to start a conversation with you guys. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching and have a great day.